Good morning. This is the final week of the quarter. We have been studying the subject, what does that mean? This last little mini portion was on 4 or 5 terms that I want us to look at, finish looking at today. Last week, you remember, we started with impute, and this an accounting term that basically means, especially as it's used mostly in the New Testament, that Christ took on the guilt that we owed and makes us innocent or righteous in the eyes of God. And it's a very important central part of the book of Romans. We talked about the second law of pardon, which is a term that we use to speak of what God's plan is for Christians when we sin, and especially in a public sense, in a sense in which 1 John 1 and verse 6, we leave the light and go into the darkness. So that's kind of where we left off, I think, when the bell rang. And we've got 3 today. I'm trying to handle most of what you put on the board. You remember that first week? We drew up, there was what we did in class, and then most of it was after class. Some folks came up and we filled that out. I'll tell you up front, we're not going to deal with a few terms that would probably be better in a study on denominational doctrine. So, for example, rapture, tribulation. Only to say that when we sing visions of rapture, now burst on my sight, we are not talking about any doctrine that deals with the righteous being pulled up into heaven and everybody else being on earth for 7 years in tribulation before Christ comes and sits on a throne in Jerusalem, none of which the New Testament teaches. All right, rapture there is joy beyond description. It feels so good that it's so exciting. Okay, so maybe we'll look at that in a future date. What I wanted to start with tonight, if you want to go ahead and let's go to Job first. I was going to say Genesis. We'll get there. Let's go to Job chapter 1 and verse 6. Job chapter 1 and verse 6. And when somebody gets there, if you want to read that for us. And if somebody wants to go ahead and tackle Job chapter 2 and verse 1. Pretty much companion text. We're very familiar with this in the beginning of the study of the book of Job.
Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them.
All right, go to chapter 2 and verse 1 and read that.
Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord.
Okay, so in both chapter 1 and verse 6 and chapter 2 and verse 1, there are these beings that are introduced to us, and they are referred to as sons of God. What is the writer of Job, what is he referring to? What do you believe these to be? Angels. Okay, in fact, it's of interest that in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, so between the end of the Old Testament and the start of the New Testament, there's a 400-year period. And about halfway in between that period, because Greek became, with the Alexander the Great and conquering the world, Greek began to be the language that was spoken all over the world, so that everybody, it's kind of like English has become today, everybody spoke Greek pretty much, or that could be the common commerce language. And so they wanted to be able to translate the Old Testament into the common language. So that's kind of what we've done in the translation today. And the Greek Old Testament used our word in the New Testament for angels in Job 1 and verse 6 and in Job chapter 2 and verse 1. The Hebrew word there is B'nai Ha-Elohim. Sons of God. So you hear like Ben, when you hear about somebody who's Jewish and their name is something Ben something, right? Ben Gurion, airport, that's son. All right, Ha of, and then Elohim, God. Okay, so let's go over to Job chapter 38 and verse 7. Job 38, 7. All right, so this is in the portion of the book of Job. You remember Job is suffering. He doesn't know why. He calls God into account. He increasingly, more boldly says, I want an explanation for why I'm suffering. I haven't done anything wrong. My 3 friends say that I have. This upstart Elihu says that I have. And I want you to show everybody that I'm right. And so you remember God comes to him out of the whirlwind, think tornado. All right, and so as God comes out of the tornado, he starts in Job 38 by asking you, where was you when ... Okay, so there's a long series of these, and Job 38 verse 7 is in the middle of those. So somebody read Job 38 and verse 7.
When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy.
Okay, so this is before Job, and presumably humans are on the scene. When the morning stars sang together, all right, so think of the creation, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Who do we think these sons of God are here? Seems pretty clear to be angels, right? Okay, so that's it's a poetic book, but Job is a narrative story told in poetic form. Okay, let's go to the book of Psalms, which is more overtly poetic in its language, although that doesn't mean that everything's figurative in the book of Psalms. Obviously, it's not. A lot of messianic prophecy is found in the book of Psalms. All right, so let's go to Psalm 29 and verse 1. A slightly different word is used, but it's synonymous. You'll see that the only difference is that instead of Elohim, it is a different word for God, and so it's the sons of the mighty. Psalm 29 and verse 1. Someone read that for us.
Given to the Lord, all you mighty ones. Given to the Lord, glory and strength.
All right, so New King James?
Yes.
Your mighty ones, okay? Who's toting the ESV? What do you have?
Heavenly beings.
Heavenly beings. All right, heavenly beings. Okay, somewhat descriptive, maybe an explanation of what the New King James says. Anybody have a different rendering? I'm using the New American Standard.
Sons of the mighty.
Sons of the mighty. All right, so mighty ones. Mighty, though, what you need to understand is that's a word for God there. It's not just they're strong. It's the sons of the mighty. Heavenly beings. I believe the New American Standard captures it better. Let's see what in your version Psalm 89 and verse 6 says. Psalm 89 and verse 6. Talking about God's mastery over everything in Psalm 89. And whoever gets there, if you want to read that. Somebody with the New King James, read that for us. Psalm 89, 6.
Who in the heavens can be compared to the Lord? Who among the sons of the mighty can be likened to the Lord?
Okay, all right. So just for a note, if you want to draw in the margins of your Bible, sons of the mighty there, same exact, in the Hebrew, same exact phrase as Psalm 29 and verse 1. What translations will do sometimes is to break up reading so you don't keep coming across the same words or the same phrases. They give an acceptable but synonymous rendering so it's not as monotonous to read. Psalm 89 and verse 6 is using the same phrase, sons of the mighty. This is very synonymous with sons of God. In both of these, who does it appear to be referring to? Angels. Anybody have any issue, compunction, problem with that? All right. Now, let's move over to the New Testament. In the New Testament, you will... Yes, sir.
Well, I got a question about Genesis 6.
Well, we'll get there.
Okay.
Hang on to it. All right. In fact, Kevin, you just stole my thunder. That's where we're heading, but that's all right. I think a lot of us probably thought that.
We was moving to the New Testament.
Yeah. I'm gonna set you up for Genesis 6 by going to the New Testament. When you hear the phrase "sons of God" or "son of God" in the New Testament, what do you typically think of?
Jesus.
Say again.
Jesus.
Okay, so we talk about the Son of God. We're talking about Jesus, but with the more general phrase "sons of God." Us. Galatians 3:26. For you are all the sons of God by faith in Christ Jesus. For as many of us have been baptized into Christ, have put on Christ. I would say that the predominant use of that phrase in the New Testament is referring to Christians, sons of God. Okay? So I think therein lies the rub when we get to a passage like the very first use. The same phrase, B'nai Ha Elohim, is used in Genesis chapter 6. So I want us to turn over there. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 through verse 4. All right, just for context, this is an explanation of the events that lead ultimately to the flood. this is a huge reason why. It'll continue. Verse 5 will say that every imagination of the thoughts of men's heart was only evil continually, and it made God sorry, or God repented that he had made man. Before that, this is a transition. What has happened in Genesis 4 and 5 is God has given us the genealogies. Specifically the genealogies of Seth. Okay, so the righteous seed through whom Christ is going to eventually come. Now, this is important because Moses, if you remember, if you followed along in the Lehman Learned at the beginning of the year, we kind of demonstrated that the book of Genesis is set up on a spine. And the spine of the book of Genesis is, these are the generations. They're kind of bookmarks, they're pegs throughout the book of Genesis. When there is a transition from one topic to another in the book of Genesis, it'll begin with a phrase like, now these are the generations of, or these are the genealogies of, and then so forth. So what's just happened is that Moses has given us Seth's genealogy all the way up to Noah. All right? So then, Genesis chapter 6 begins. It came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God, there's our phrase, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves, whomever they choose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. So this passage is considered difficult, and is probably the reason for a what does that mean entry into our study. So let me just throw it out to you and ask you, what is Moses talking about? Who is Moses talking about in Genesis 6, 1 through 4? Who are the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6?
Righteous. I say the faithful, righteous.
The righteous, the faithful? Anybody think another answer?
We've always named that these Nephilim were like giants and stuff because they were a mix of angels and people.
Okay.
That's what I've always heard, but I don't know if that's true.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for your courage. There's probably others around the room who wanted to say that, and they just didn't feel like they could.
My commentary says fallen angels.
Fallen angels. Okay. I really want to do this, but I just don't want to. I don't want to create division here. I'm curious if you believe that it's the righteous. Kind of set your case up. Why do you believe that this is talking about the righteous? Or maybe you have a different way. Is there a different way that you would express it? I think Bobby captures that idea, that belief pretty well, the righteous. Would there be any other way you would categorize it if you kind of hold to that view?
Well, I say faithful as well.
The faithful? Okay.
If you're going to the transition to the flood, and the reasoning for that is because the evil, or all the thoughts were evil. You see throughout the Old Testament where the Israel, children of God, whatever, don't fall to idols, don't mix with this other group of people because then you'll be influenced by their idolatry. So then you kind of, if you take that they're the faithful, well, the daughters of men, well, idolatry, sin, that lifestyle, not following God, that kind of shows that intermingling, which leads to falling away from God and evil in their hearts all the time.
So descriptive terms, right? So you have the sons of God being the righteous. And you're going to see a thread where Israel is to be set apart, is to be different. And this is before Judaism. This is before the covenant with Moses. But you have this principle that you're not to defile yourself with the world. And so the idea would be that the daughters of men would represent the unrighteous. Now there are some who would put a finer point on it than that. Contextually. And really, that's context and understanding of word meaning is going to be very helpful to us in trying to come to a position. And by the way, this is a spoiler alert, but it might make you a little calmer. I believe that you can hold either one of those views and be right. And I'm going to try to show you a defense for both of those views. And then I'm going to tell you which one I believe. You probably already know, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So let's deal with that first view. So the first major view is that this represents, the sons of God represents the righteous. That the sons of God would be, in context, the argument goes, the descendants of Seth. And the daughters of men, who would they be? The descendants of whom? Cain. Okay? Plausible, isn't it? Right? And it fits with a principle that goes throughout the Old Testament, and that is that the righteous are not to sell out spiritually to the unrighteous. You think about the Decalogue of Moses, even if it's your family member, if they turn to idolatry, you are to be the first to throw a stone so as to keep the land from being defiled. Some other arguments for why this would be just as Bobby and Derek have expressed, and many of you perhaps feel, besides the lineage, if there's a subject change here to angels, it would be abrupt. There's no lead-in, and then there's no continuity. They kind of come on the scene, and they go off the scene. If it refers to the degenerate descendants of Cain corrupting and negatively influencing the descendants of Seth, it makes a plausible explanation for why the flood came and why the human race had to be judged. Right? God saw that the imaginations of men's heart were only evil continually. It is also, what other arguments would you add to this position? Do you have any fundamental problems with the idea of angels consorting with people? Huh?
Angels can't marry or reproduce, and tells us in Matthew.
All right, Matthew 22 and verse 30, Jesus is answering the Sadducees, right? And they're saying a man had a wife. He had 7 brothers. They all had her. They all died. None of them had a child with her. The woman dies. In the resurrection, whose wife shall she be? Jesus says, you do err, not knowing the Scriptures, for they do not marry, nor are given in marriage in heaven, but they are like the angels in heaven. Matthew 22 and verse 30. And so the question is, how would this be possible if these were angels? Okay? All right? What else? Anything else that you would add to that? If you haven't, man is condemned for the evil on the earth, not angels. Verse 5. I've already said that. What about the Nephilim? If you hold this position, what do you do with the what do you understand the Nephilim to be? Giants.
Warriors.
How does warriors? Now, when we see the Nephilim, and we're going to see them, it says that they were on the earth in those days, and after these days, every time you see these warriors, what is one distinct trait about all of them? They're tall. How does that make sense with this position? Because the righteous, have you ever seen somebody righteous and they marry somebody unrighteous? They always have giants, don't they? How does that make sense in the context? That because the righteous are with the unrighteous, that as the result of that union, when good people and bad people get together, giants come. Okay, so what would be the explanation if you hold the view that this is the righteous and the unrighteous?
You said earlier it was abrupt. It's abrupt to mention the Nephilim because they don't fit in there in any other way, really, in this context. And then some people have connected Jude 6 with it, but I don't know if that's right. It just says they've left their abode, their natural abode.
Okay, all right.
That could mean something totally different, but I have seen people connect that with this. And then, of course, the numbers, they mentioned them again, and the people were like grasshoppers. So
Yeah.
they're clearly much bigger than people.
Okay, the normal people.
Yeah.
Goliath and his brother. You know, you have the fights in 2 Samuel. You have Numbers 13. So all I'm doing is we want to make sure that we have a clear and consistent view here.
And I don't know. That's just what I've been told all along.
Robert, you're just a troublemaker. That's just,
Okay, either way.
any other thoughts in favor of or against this being the descendants of Seth? And I'm not trying to unsettle your faith. You read this, you need to be able to make sense of it, right? What does that mean? Some more in favor of this. Augustine favored this view. He was the man, the emperor, who was responsible for legalizing Christianity in the Roman Empire. Some would say codifying the religious error that already existed at that time. You know what I mean? It's the more popular view in modern times. It's probably more popular in modern times than it has ever been in church history. Another argument in favor of this, the defenders of this point of view say that sons of God can refer to God's people. Deuteronomy 14 verse 1 is the passage that's cited. You can hear me, or you want to turn over there if you want to. Deuteronomy 14:1 says, "You are the sons of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourself, nor shave your forehead for the sake of the dead." If you do write that down, do notice that it's a little different. This is not exactly the same, but if you even make this a tie, this is the only time in the Old Testament where the sons of with the article, the sons of God, more like the New Testament way, is used in that way. Every other time sons of God is used, we've started the class with it. The general consensus use of sons of God in the Old Testament is of angels. Okay? Now, before we leave this idea, I think one commendable principle that comes out of this, no matter what Genesis 6 is talking about, is there is a great principle that we should have the courage and boldness to teach to our kids as they are considering a mate. That who you marry has a strong influence, I can argue, that the strongest influence among earthly people that you'll bring into your life. And so you want to be very careful that you're not on different pages spiritually. I think that's a solid principle that we can draw from here. Those who favor this view say that saying that this is the descendants of Seth avoids a supernatural interpretation and is more compatible with Matthew 22:30 and is favored by Reformed scholars. All right, so here's the problems with the position as far as I can tell it. The term sons of God is never clearly used of humans elsewhere in the Old Testament. Deuteronomy 14:1 being a possible exception. And number two, it does not clearly explain the Nephilim, which are generally taken to be giants. Okay? All right, thoughts on the Seth position before I move to one that probably none of us believe, but I want to give it about a minute and a half anyway. You want me to get to number 3, but all right, I'll do that. Number 2, there's the idea that this refers to human rulers or judges. Sons of God was a phrase that you can find in Old Testament civilizations that refer to powerful kings or rulers who practice polygamy or sexual exploitation. And so the ideas here would be that the daughters of men, the sons of God rather, were these powerful rulers who came in and took what they wanted by force. And that violence kind of fits with the context here. And that the daughters of men were those who had no choice but to be exploited. And God just said, I'm sick of this. Shouldn't be this way. And so the flood comes. Okay? It's probably leans more toward the first view, but it's distinct, obviously. The problems with that position is that there's no textual support for this in Scripture. This is just kind of pulling it out of the air. We really don't want to form positions that are formed that way. And it also doesn't help us to understand the Nephilim clearly. All right, so what about angels? I think Robert's kind of given us some of it. Anybody have any other thoughts along those lines? All right. This position is supported by how sons of God is used in Job and Psalms. It's the general use of the Old Testament is of angels. Ancient Jewish texts like the book of Enoch describes angels descending to earth, marrying women, and producing offspring that they call the Nephilim. Book of Enoch. It's not a heretical book, but it is a book that does not claim inspiration. So it's not in the Old Testament canon. So there are two classes of books that fall outside of the Old Testament canon. There are books that are rejected because they teach false things. Book of Enoch is not in that category. The Book of Enoch falls into books like the books of Maccabees and there's about 13 of those that don't claim inspiration, but they don't overtly contradict Old Testament truth. They just don't. They're not recognized. They didn't claim to be inspired. The view that the sons of God were angels was the prevalent view in the early, among Jews and among the early Christians. So Philo, to whom we make reference often in looking at Old Testament history, and Enoch, as we've already mentioned, not our Enoch in Genesis, but another, believed that this was angels. It was the prevailing view of the early church fathers. Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and Tertullian. Another argument in favor of it is that the text in Genesis chapter 6 seems to naturally read as though something extraordinary and something supernatural is happening. The biggest problem, what do you think the biggest problem is that people have with this position? It's what Doris said. Matthew 22 and verse 30. And the idea that spirits, and angels are spirits, Hebrews 1 and verse 14, can produce offsprings with humans. Now, perhaps this problem can be cleared up by a few New Testament passages. And I want us to turn there and look at those. The first is 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 and 5. All right, so you have two passages that are very similar in message to one another. And they are talking about people who are facing judgment because of unrighteousness, particularly sexual unrighteousness. Let's start in 2 Peter 2 and verse 1. But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who brought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their sensuality, a word typically talking about pandering to the flesh, but especially in sexual matters. And because of them, the way of truth will be blasphemed. And in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their condemnation from long ago is not idle, and their destruction is not asleep. All right, so in context, these are the people Peter's dealing with. Peter's saying these are bad folks, these are false teachers. They're coming in and they're teaching a message that's going to exploit you. It centers around the flesh and sensual things. All right, and in that context, he says, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if, by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And he rescued Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked. For as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. What's generally the overriding issue Peter wants to deal with in 2 Peter 2, 1 through about 10? Sexual immorality. Deviations from the sexual order. What would be an example of that? What is one example in the context of someone deviating from what is right, natural, and the sexual order? Sodom and Gomorrah, which is homosexuality. All right, so we have these individuals who are trying to pervert the truth about sexual things. As an example of how bad this is, let me show you 2 things that highlight how destructive this is. One of which is the leaving of natural flesh, Romans chapter 1, of homosexuality. What's the other example? What is the other example? And what's connected with that? It's in verse 4. The angels who sinned. All right, now, Jude is going to be talking about something very similar. So let's turn over to Jude. Jude verse 6 and 7. Jude, of course, being a one chapter book. Jude starts the letter by saying, I was going to write about the common salvation, a much more positive subject, but I needed to do something more urgent, and that's to appeal to you to contend for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. For certain people have crept in unnoticed, who long ago were designated for this condemnation, ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into sensuality and deny our only Master and Lord Jesus Christ. Now I want to remind you, although you once fully knew it, that Jesus, who saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed those who did not believe. And the angels who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. And then you can just follow the thread of these people also, but these people, woe to them, and so forth. He even mentions Balaam further on in the text. Do you remember something happens in the Balaam case? Do you remember Balaam? What was Balaam's job? Balak hired him to do what? To curse Israel. Did it work? How many times did he try? 3 times. Failed every time. But he had some success, didn't he? What was his success? What did he get the people to do? Well, without the benefit of marriage. They worship Baal of Peor with a bunch of prostitutes and engage in sexual immorality. There is at least a contextual hint that there is a leaving of natural sexual function for the unnatural, and as an explanation of that being a departure from the faith. A principle we would all agree with. Okay? Especially in Jude, it seems like there's a possible explanation of what takes place. If angels remain in heaven, can they be marriage partners for the daughters of men? If they leave their habitation and their abode, which would be not spirit beings, but come to the earth, can they engage? And can they have extraordinary offspring that would not be explained otherwise? Okay. Now, again, go ahead, Kevin. I'll summarize in just a moment.
Well, I was just thinking through all that, and at the flood, there was left 8 people.
Mm-hmm.
None of them would have been tied to the line. Am I doing something?
No, you're good. This is a key question.
Your thunder for a second.
No, there's no thunder there. I didn't even have that one on in my weather pattern. But go ahead.
The eight souls that were saved wouldn't have any tie, seemingly, to the giants. But later on, giants were back again.
Mm-hmm.
Where did they come from?
Well, so what's the genealogical profile of Mrs. Noah or Mrs. Ham, Shem, and Japheth? Could have been genetic carryover there. Again, what I was about to say, and that's a great question because that has to be factored into how do we come up with this, is does this matter to our soul's salvation? No. But why do I take it? Because I can't tell you how many times folks say, what does that mean? I have a satisfactory explanation that if they left their abode, and I don't have any other understanding of what Jude is talking about, if it's not talking about them leaving, and in concert with Genesis 6, 1-4, to help me understand how that phrase that typically is talking about angels makes sense in the context, except to say that they left their proper abode, they saw the daughters of men, they wanted them, it was not proper, it wasn't right, they left their habitation to where they could come and they could intermarry, and as the result of this, we have the Nephilim that come about, and that's my own mental explanation, is it probably came through the line of the women. Not blaming the women, but that makes the most sense of the 8 folks that get on the ark. And it is why the New Testament writers make this argument that a lot of error centers around fleshly ideals that are contrary to the will of God, not infrequently revolving around sexual immorality. Okay? Think about some of the things that are ripping our culture apart. Are they departures from God's sexual plan? And I don't just mean what we're talking about right now. Think about the other things that are destroying our culture, that are departures from God's plan for sexuality. You know, the decreasing marriage rates and the increased cohabitation, adultery. You know, you just name it. There's several things that can fit there. All right? So I'm of the view that this is referring to angels that left their habitation and married women They could not do this where they were. This is not talking about what's going to happen to us when we leave this life. This is talking about something that happened in the past. And it satisfies me as to where the Nephilim came from. You can think that I'm all wet, and please tell me if I am. But that's my position on it. All right, yep, Brady.
So is in Genesis 6:3, is that just more of, I guess, in that context, or would that be like a resetting of the moral nature of man?
Yes. Yeah. My spirit will not strive with man forever because he is also flesh. And you'll see that again on the other side of the flood. Yeah. Is there a follow-up or just okay? All right. Any other thoughts or comments or questions?
Do you think any of, I don't know if I've asked you this before, do you think any of the potential offspring like you talked about, I know this is a leap, but all these stories can't just be made up. All your Greek gods, their kids, your this and that, you made comment of if one of those came down and bred with a woman, he would have an offspring that was just way more capable than us. I'm just thinking Hercules, I'm thinking all these things. Is there any credibility to that? Not credibility that they should have been worshipped, but that any of those people were based off of some of these offspring at some point.
And so it's not even just that. There are a lot of you think about how many civilizations have creation stories, have very eerily similar accounts of the flood, and an accounting for I've often heard individuals say that Greek and Roman mythology would have drawn their ideas from these events that we read about in Genesis. However the Nephilim got here, that it would have been from that.
And is it a stretch to assume that that's who they're crediting that, that the Greek gods could have been Nephilim of some sort? Is that a stretch to even think? I'm not saying
it's
it
plausible.
has to be true.
It's plausible. I don't know that I'd speak dogmatically, but I think it's possible. All right. Thoughts? Okay. All right. Here was our... Okay, here we go. What? Did y'all catch all that? All right. Number 4, or one more of my notes, eschatology. What does that mean? Anybody kind of have an answer to that? Okay, you ever heard the word? No? Okay. All right, so we sometimes talk about eschatology or matters of eschatology. Maybe it's preachers, maybe it's in school. But I've had that question asked before, and it was one of our words I didn't come up with. But it's not in the Bible, it's not in the Bible in English, but it refers to biblical things. In Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 2, we have the Greek word eschaton. And essentially there, God, who in time past spoken to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days, that word there, it's a compound Greek word that is translated with 2 words, last days. That's eschaton. The Hebrew word is hayamin. It's found in a passage you've heard, Isaiah 2:2-4. Maybe you remember from Equipped that you have the idea that in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house will be established in the top of the mountains. And it's a reference to the church that's going to be established. That phrase, that idea of last days, is in the Greek Old Testament is eschaton. So eschaton is a study of last things. That's all that it means. If it comes up in Bible trivia, if you want to have an intelligent sounding conversation about the study of eschatology, would include things like the study of death and the afterlife. Okay, that would fall within the realm of that. The resurrection of the dead would be an eschatological subject. Final judgment, the second coming, the end of the world. All of these are fall within the realm of... Now, obviously, the 2 references that I made, the way that the last days are being used in Isaiah 2 and in Hebrews 1 and verse 2 is not actually referring to what eschatology refers to. The last days there are the Christian age. Has in these last days spoken unto us by His Son, whom He's appointed heir of all things, and so forth, all the descriptions in 1 and 2 and 3. But the word eschatology refers to all the things at the very end. Okay? Any thoughts or questions on that? And with that, we dispatch with that one. All right, the last one I want to deal with, Hades and Sheol. This is one that you asked about. What does that mean? Hades and Sheol. Okay, Gary says it's the place of disembodied spirits. The realm of the dead. All right, so what's the difference? Is this the same thing? If it's not, which one are you defining for me? Hades or Sheol?
Hades is for the evil, Sheol for the good.
Okay, all right. No, but that's a very educated guess. Hades is the Greek. What's Sheol? The Hebrew, the Old Testament. All right, so they're basically the same. They're used interchangeably, and I'll show you in just a moment. Sheol in the Old Testament refers to the abode of the dead, a place where both the righteous and the unrighteous reside after death. Hades is the New Testament equivalent. And just if you want a reference of this, in Psalm 16 and verse 10, David is speaking of Jesus and the resurrection. And this is, you will not leave my soul in Sheol, depending on your translation. That's Psalm 16 and verse 10. And Peter's going to quote this in the first gospel sermon, in Acts 2 and verse 27. And yet he's going to say, you will not leave my soul in Hades. All right? And they're used interchangeably. Both places are taught not as physical graves, but as realms where souls exist consciously after death, awaiting the resurrection and the final judgment. Now, throw this little monkey wrench into that real quick. I don't have very long. Gus Nichols and others held the view that when one dies, they immediately go to the judgment. That there is no intermediate place to the dead. There is a doctrine I don't fully understand called soul sleeping. There are some who believe that when somebody dies, they sleep, and at the resurrection, they arise to consciousness again, and then the judgment. Now, some have tried to say that that's a heretical position. I don't know that I'd go that far. I just don't think it's a supported position. So, somebody used this explanation. It may have been Gary. What did you say? What was your definition? Do you remember? Place of disembodied spirits. What else would we think about Hades and Sheol? Jesus went there. What happens?
There's a great gulf between two places.
Oh, okay, so I wanted to do this just really quick here. So we have us right now, everybody in the room. We're all in time. We're here. All right? Hebrews 9 and verse 27 says, anybody know? Even as it is appointed unto men once to die. All right, so we got death. And then it says, after this, I'm going to just do this if it's okay. After this is the judgment. All right, so how does Hades and Sheol, the place of the dead, the place of disembodied spirits, how does that fit as an understanding between someone wants to die and after this, the judgment? There's a something, apparently, between this and the after this. And it appears that there is a place, an intermediate state, where the dead continue to exist consciously. Now, how do we know that? All right, so I think that's what Kevin was referring to in Luke 16, 19 through 31. All right, you have the rich man and Lazarus. It says that Lazarus died and he was carried by the angels into where? Okay, that's a deduction we make, but what does the text actually say? Jesus says that he found himself where? Abraham's bosom. All right. And where did the rich man find himself? In torment. All right. So, why would Harold refer to this as paradise? This is Luke 16, 19 through 31.
What Jesus said to the man on the cross, the other man on the cross.
Luke 23, 43, Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. Now, I would just kind of join this to Psalm 16 and verse 10. You would not leave my soul in Hades, or suffer your Holy One to see corruption. Jesus was somewhere for 3 days. And our King James Version sometimes can really confuse us because what does the King James say? Thou wilt not leave my soul in hell. some will say Jesus would say that. I'm not even going to say it. That's the late Hugo McCord used to say, that's a sorry translation there. It reflects the change in the English language. The readers of the original King James, I presume, would understand this, although a darker explanation of that would be that if you believe in the doctrine of purgatory, then you would have, there's some corrupt thoughts here. Jesus did not go to Gehenna. That would be the word that would be used there. The word that's used there is Hades. He went to the realm of the dead. How could somebody who never sinned, even though he took on the sin of the world, how could he go to Gehenna? He went, and why would it be a comfort for the penitent thief to go with Jesus there? He's saying, you'll not leave my soul in Hades. And so that's this is Hades or Sheol, in which there is a place for the righteous, and then there's a place of torment. Do we read about that anywhere else? God knows how to deliver the godly from judgment and to reserve, 8 and 9 by the way, 8 and 9, and reserve the unjust under chains of darkness until the last day. All right, so this idea of Tartarus or torture, torment, is what's spoken of there. By the way, if you want to tie it back to sons of God, that's where they are also. 2 Peter 2, 4 and Jude 6 and 7. They're waiting their fate there as well. And just as a final, in this class, you have them not in time. So here's a question to leave you with. When we meet with Adam at the judgment, how long will Adam have been there waiting?
5,000 plus years.
As we look at it, 5,000 plus years. How long has Adam been there? What happened when he died? The time for him. So let's say that the earth lasts 1,000 years after we die. How long will it be before those folks 1,000 years come alongside of us to the judgment? I would suggest to you it's about like that. Now, I don't mean it's that fast. I just mean that time exists for us here, not for them there. So ultimately, if you say that there's no place of the dead and we go straight into the judgment, I don't know that that's not splitting hairs a little bit, but I would say the Bible teaches this place exists, and so that's where I'm going to stand on it. All right? Okay, boy, don't have any time for questions. All right, thanks very much for your attention.